This is TWiT.
Joining us to talk about her thoughts from a developer's perspective is Camila Taylor, former senior software engineer at LinkedIn and previously a software engineer at Wolfram Research. Camila is now working on an app called Swaay, focused on reducing polarization and toxicity in online discourse. Welcome to the show, Camila.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here today.
Oh, thanks for coming on. So what stood out the most to you in terms of all the announcements at WWDC?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of big ones. There's definitely the stuff around Swift UI, which is their new framework for being able to build apps. And then there was their sign-in with Apple, which was a big one as well. And there are a couple of other under the hood things that they did. And of course, there was the Mac Pro announcement as well, which I think is really more for the extreme professional market. But I think those are the three biggest things for me.
So I know that your app that you're developing now is on the iPhone. Is the Catalyst, the announcement that they made about being able to develop once for iOS and I presume iPadOS and also macOS, was that exciting to you?
Yes, actually, I thought that was really exciting. So back when I was at Wolfram, I did a little bit of Mac development and always felt kind of painful for me. And so even when I started doing mobile development, I really never dove that deeply into Mac development. And I think this is really exciting because there's been so much energy over the years around the mobile community, especially when Apple added Swift. And I think Catalyst is a huge opportunity to sort of capture some of that momentum that's there in the mobile community to get people to develop more Mac apps, to potentially get more people developing those native experiences instead of the lecture-in apps or TypeScript apps.
Were you surprised at all that Apple kind of went in the direction of iOS for phones, iPadOS for the iPad, obviously? Does that change kind of how you're developing your app based on these different presentations?
Yeah, I mean I was a little bit surprised that they separated it out in that way, but it makes sense. And I mean, the rumors were there that something was coming to switches. I know a lot of people were talking about iPadOS. I didn't actually think they were going to go there, but they did. Mm-hmm. But I think it makes sense because I think they're really trying to compete a little bit more with products such as the Microsoft Surface with the iPad. And by separating out the iPad a little bit more from the iPhone, they can, I think, capture that in-between market between the personal computer and the phone a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I think tying the iPad to iOS in that way was maybe hampering that a little bit. Mm-hmm.
What about dark mode? I know there was a lot of talk about it, and I use it sometimes, but I mean, you're on a screen a lot. Is that something that you're excited about?
No, I kind of roll my eyes every time I get really excited about dark mode. I don't get the hype. Okay, I sort of get it. I think especially if you code in the dark a little bit more or something, I do not. I usually am not coding in the dark. And I actually I feel like I have to think a little bit harder when I switch to dark mode. I keep trying to switch on Mojave and then switching back to regular. But I do think that there is an audience there who's super excited about this, right? And who do feel more at home using dark themes. So I think that's interesting. And the bigger thing for me is the amount of work Apple is doing to not make it harder on developers to support both light mode and dark mode, right? So they added a bunch of stuff in their APIs that you can sort of just automatically switch to that with a bunch of their Swift UI stuff. You can even, and their live preview features in Xcode, you can sort of see what light mode and dark mode look like immediately. And I think that's super exciting.
So then I guess that leads to, are you going to be integrating any sort of dark mode hooks into your app? Is there a demand for it? Have you heard from some of your users saying, hey, we would love to see a dark mode version of this app?
I actually want to start playing around with a lot of the Swift UI stuff. I think it's going to be really hard for most apps to do this meaningfully because because it's iOS 13 only. And if you take a look in the App Store, a lot of the apps out there are actually targeting iOS 9 still or iOS 10. And so I think it's going to be a little while before you'll be able to really like take advantage of a lot of that stuff. But if you're a new app, I say like go for it. You might as well try, and like you can pick iOS 13 as your minimum version number and try it out. And the good thing is iOS devices actually get like pretty fast adoption rate.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're at a company like LinkedIn. We should say LinkedIn is one of our sponsors, but yeah. And then you decide to leave and create your own thing. What possessed you to leave a job and then just become an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So, I was at LinkedIn for about 5.5 years. So I had a really great time there. I worked on a lot of different apps. And I just had like an itch to start like building my own stuff, definitely after 2016 and the election and stuff. I just kept on like having this like thought in my head of like, like I work in this area, like maybe I could try and like build something, like I know this is a hard problem space, but I think we need as many smart people as possible that's like really trying to solve this, right? This is like the next big like sort of issue in the tech industry. It was just like it has to be solved. And so that was sort of part of my motivation. I really was thinking about that for a lot after the election and throughout 2017. And that's how I decided to make the leap. And it's been a lot of fun. And the other thing that I've been doing as well is working with a lot of startups as well. And that's been fun too, because I've been able to work in like different like tech domains before. Like I was working with like an AR company last year a lot, Crikey. And so that was like a different domain that I hadn't been able to work on at LinkedIn. So it's been a great ride actually.
So that's kind of the voyage to get to where you are right now. But take a few minutes and tell people what Swaay is all about and kind of what they can expect to see when they download your app.
Yeah, so Swaay is about facilitating thoughtful conversations online, right? And so our basic insight here is that our current social experiences, they really sort of incentivize their engagement, incentivizes sensationalist content, and incentivizes the harassment that we see and the propaganda that we see. And we really wanted to take a look at like, how can we change like the behavior that we reward users for? How can we reward people for actually contributing like thoughtful things to a conversation? And how can we change how we're serving content to people and serving news, so it's not necessarily like the next like sensational headline, and instead it's something based on a lot of different people, maybe from like different backgrounds, have like contributed thoughtfully to this like topic. And that's what we want to like surface, is like the real conversation, and not like the conversations that are being fueled by like the bots, et cetera, right? Or like people who are deliberately sort of trolling for an extreme response. And so that's our vision for Swaay.
So constantly in the news we hear these big companies reacting like, oh yeah, there are Nazis saying hateful things on our platform, we'll do something about it. Or, they're pedophiles. Oh, okay, right, we'll take care of that. Are you building things into Swaay that instead of just trying to be reactive when someone uses the tool in the worst way they possibly can?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that yes, like hindsight is 2020, but a lot of the like, oh my God, we're so shocked that our tools are being used like this. There were a lot of like researchers and journalists and people trying to like warn tech companies that their systems that are just like all around engagement were being used in this way and had the potential to be used in this way even worse. And it really wasn't until like 2016, 2017, and now everyone's like, oh my God, we had no idea, right? And it's not totally true, right? Like people had an idea. I think that the reactive patching is not enough, because it doesn't actually address the systemic, like this is how you serve content, right? So like it's like every week, like YouTube finds like there's like another like horrifying algorithmic like recommendation that they're having, right? Like the latest one was like with the like videos of children Before that, it was with like anti-vax videos, and it's all like the same pattern. And every time they like remove that one loop, but they haven't like actually fixed the underlying like mechanism of like how they're recommending videos to people. And I get it, you know, like apparently this serves like 70% of their of overall time spent on YouTube is actually from this, but at some point they have to, you know, like Google has enough money to maybe like take a step back and be like, how can we actually fix this instead of like doing like another reaction?
Yeah, it really is reactive entirely. And I feel like we've seen like a master class in reactivity in the last like 72 hours with YouTube, right? Like maybe a little bit longer than that, but kind of what we were talking about earlier about the kids video being, you know, easily found by pedophiles, you know, in a kind of algorithmic sense. And then we have the kind of, what was it? His name, Carlos Maza, the Vox reporter, Carlos Maza. And then of course, you know, YouTube's announcement, I think it was yesterday, right, that they were going to expel people who were, you know, had white, you know, extremism and white supremacist content and all this kind of stuff. So all of this is happening at once and it's very reactive. Do you think, like, is there a moment where all of this kind of comes to a head and YouTube has learned a lesson? Or do you think that the business model is so built out at this point and it's so huge that there's just no way to right the ship? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to actually like take a stand at some point. And this is true for YouTube. It's true for Twitter. It's true for Facebook. So we see this again and again where they'll say, like, for example, their first reaction to this was they said, I think they said something around like, oh, well, we took a look and like the individual videos there's like no problem with that. You see that on Twitter. The individual tweets like were not like a huge problem, right. Or like the individual Facebook posts were not a huge problem. And then they kind of came back and were like, oh, well, we see that this had like a community impact. And I think it's frustrating to me because all of these companies, you know, for years and years, like pitched this like grand vision of this global community that they were building. And none of their policies are actually around how to like foster this and like govern this global community. And like, this is what happens. Like, they don't want to be governing people, but they wanted to build a global community, you know, like you can't have like one without the other. And so, I mean, like this is their bed, right? They need to lay in it. This is the system and this is the community that they built. And I think it's just like, it's not enough for them to be like, this is not the problem we wanted, because they wanted this global community. And so this is the consequence of having that.
Right.
Yeah. So Swaay hasn't launched yet, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, are you going into it as opposed to what Twitter and YouTube, you know, they say, oh, you know, we're just an open platform. We're not going to make judgments. Are you going into it saying like, we are going to make content judgments, we are going to remove people, or what's the model around that?
Yeah, I think we're going into this saying that if you want to have a community of people discussing things, then there have to be like rules. Every society has rules. And this isn't about like, me enforcing my like political opinions on you, but this is much more on like rules of engagement and how we all treat each other. And if you're in this space, then there's some rules of engagement. If you can't like abide by those rules of engagement, then this is not a space for you. And that's the sort of thing that we really need. And there's this weird thing where like, I think so YouTube earlier this week, they said, opinions can be deeply offensive, but if they don't violate our policies, they'll remain on our site. And I think it's like the crux of like the very strange way in which these tech companies are looking at this. And they sort of allow themselves to sort of be sucked into this argument, right? Where people are like, oh, you're actually like not being an open space for people who have like a different opinion. And that's not it at all. It's much more around like how you engage with other people like on that platform, right? And if you're engaging in a way that is sort of like that is unsafe towards me, then there's not like you can't have a healthy community in that way, right? Like again, there has to be rules. And so that's something that's like very important to us with Swaay, is to really just like be very open at the beginning about like, these are the rules of engagement on this platform.
Camila Taylor is an entrepreneur, an engineer, a writer, and a public speaker. And thank you so much for taking the time. Go to the Swaay with two A's.com and you can sign up to find out more information when the app comes out. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today.
Great talking with you.